Welcome to the DevPool show, the show where we talk about tips and tricks on how to become a successful developer. Today I'll be talking about software architecture, and how I'm gonna do this is I'll be talking about from my experience working as a full-stack software engineer, freelancer, and this is the way how I do it. It doesn't mean that that's the only way, but I'll be sharing my experience. And after this video, I'll be talking about how did I teach myself to think like a programmer, how did I become a successful freelancer, and how am I not getting burned out working multiple jobs, doing multiple things. So yeah, if you're interested in any of those topics, press subscribe to get notified whenever those topics appear. And yeah, welcome to the DevPool show. And before we talk about software architecture, first we'll probably need to understand why is it so important. Software architecture gives us the ability of communicating our decisions and communicating how our design will look like even before implementing. And by doing that, it gives us the ability of controlling how our design will look like before implementing, because later down the line, it can cost you a lot of money to make different decisions. So what is software architecture? Well, depending on the role, software architecture can mean many things, but in a nutshell for everyone, it's like a blueprint that is solving a specific problem to a solution for a business. And when it comes to software architecture, it has multiple steps. So the first step actually is to identify what is it we're building. So let's say right now you're an architect, a building architect, and you've been given an assignment to design a building. And the first question you're gonna ask is, well, what this building is for? Am I designing a house, a cabin? Am I designing a military base? And if I'm designing a military base, that means I need to implement some sort of security around it, right? And as you notice, when you ask those questions, you start to think about how you'll be designing this already. And it's exactly the same thing goes into architecture, system architecture. Whenever you are designing those things, those are the type of things you're asking, thinking about it. And that's even before we start to think about what is that even we're going to be writing the code in. And when we have gathered all this information, it's going to be much easier for us to make an architectural decision, because then we'll know exactly what is that we're building. And when it comes to architecture, for every depending on system, depending on what is that you're building, it's always going to be different, or there might be some patterns you'll notice after building 2 or 3 different systems. You'll notice there is a pattern, but also there are things that you're using it, there are things that you don't use. So that's why it's very important to identify what is that we're building right from the beginning. And when it comes to architecture, you will have constraints, and that is more of its own problem domain. And what that means is that you can have a budget constraint where you'll notice you'll be working on one specific project, and let's say the budget for that project is $10,000. And then you're like, okay, those are the type of things I can do. And if the client comes to you, tells you that they also want something else or some sort of security plugin, well, doing that, it's already out of your budget. And within those 10,000, this is what I can do. But if you want to do this part as well, well, you're going to have to pay extra to do that. And of course, there are many other constraints like people. What I mean by that is teams. How big is a team? Do we even have a team? What are their experience? Are they an intermediate, junior, senior developers? All of those things are constraints because we don't know exactly what they're capable of. And that is also what will drive our architecture decision. And of course, there's also a time constraint, because if we're being given only 1 month of doing things, well, we'll need to analyze how long each part will take us. What is it that we can do within that 1 month? You can have a week, you can have a year. It's all depending on the project that you're working on. And the one thing to know about software architecture is that it's always changing, meaning that when you're done designing architecture in the next 6 months, 1 year, it's bound to change. Why? Well, it's because when we're designing all of that, we had a specific feature set to work with. And once a business have analyzed what is working for them, they may have said, okay, when we implemented this feature, we realized that we're not making any money out of it. Our users are not interested in that, so we should probably delete this feature. But we have noticed we have another feature that we didn't implement that is good to have. What it sounds like, now we have to go back to our first stage again of identifying it, what is that we're building again. And at that point, this is where we'll be changing our architecture. And that will take us again to stage 2 of taking a look at what our constraints are. People constraint, time, money, things like that. Also, when it comes to architecture, there are trending concerns like scalability and performance. And again, depending on the project you're on, depending on the stage you're in within architecture, sometimes you have those concerns, sometimes you don't, because if you have no users, then why are you so worried about performance of your application when you have 0 users, right? So once you have implemented it, when you have 1 user, 10, 100 users, then maybe it's worth taking a look at into a performance. And also, if there's no budget to implement performance, then performance could be out of the window as well. But for some other architecture, for some other companies where they do have a budget, where they do have a good number of users, then of course you'll be worried about performance and scalability of your application. And when it comes to making architecture decisions, the way we do things is we like to automate things, or we prefer to automate things, because if I can automate it as much as I can, that means that I'll be able to spend my time somewhere else. So in this case, for example, as I just have mentioned previously, if we have no users, well, we don't care about performance, but we might still care about scalability if there is something that's been accounted for, which means that you can put into a Kubernetes, and then once you put into a hosting platform, you don't have to worry about how many users you have on the platform and how much money we're spending on our hosting providers. Meaning that if you have 1 user, your architecture is perfect for that 1 user. If you have 100, 1,000, and millions of users, your architecture will be automatically able to scale your servers to handle that traffic. So also when it comes to architecture decisions, you'll be implementing different tools in there. Let's say you want to implement Stripe in there. And if you take a look into Stripe documentation, we see that you can have 1,000 concurrent users, paid users who can make a live payment. And that is something that will also go into our architecture decision of, okay, how can we handle this? That is something that's going to be a business feature. That means that the business needs to know, they need to figure out what is that they prefer. And based on that, that's what will trigger our architecture changes. So in a nutshell, you can see that architecture doesn't sound difficult. However, when you are implementing it, it's very, very important how you do it. Actually, it is kind of tricky to do it because there are millions of different use cases. There are a lot of things to consider. That's why it's a little bit of time consuming. So now the question is, when does an architect show his final solution to his team members? Well, all that information is ready to be passed on when all the architecture questions have been answered. So you'll bring on to the team, show them the solution, see if there are any changes need to be made, you make those changes, and once all of that has been done, then their team is going to be ready to implement those solutions. And this is not the only way of doing it. There are many, many other ways of how you can implement architecture. Again, it's all based on the company, based on the team, based on how big the system is itself. But all of that helps me to think like a programmer, how to become a freelancer, successful freelancer. And those are the things I'll be talking about in my next video. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.